Hey everyone, this is Mike. Today we're going to be talking about Delubrum Reginae normal mode. I wanted to still talk about normal mode before I make a video about Savage, because normal mode is what most of the players of this community will be interacting with, as Savage is kind of hard to get into, high barriers to entry, that kind of stuff. But I haven't cleared Savage yet at this point. This weekend I am going to be trying to clear it with a group, so hopefully next week I can make some videos on that as well, give my thoughts. Maybe some other stuff as well, like my first clear and such. But today I still wanted to talk about normal mode, as that is what most people are going to be interacting with, and is also something that you will most likely be interacting with quite a lot, because it is part of the relic quest as well. It is of course optional if you want to do it for the relic, yes or no. You can also go into Palace of the Dead instead, but I do think that most people are kind of compelled to go into the Delubrum Reginae, not only for the relic, but also because of some other things that are attached to it, like for example the mount or the hairstyle that you can get from killing the final boss as well. At least that is my main reason for going in there when I am grinding out my second and then maybe in the future my third relic as well. Seeing how I hadn't talked about this content yet, I decided to make a video on it because I do have a couple of opinions about the way that the content is set up to be in terms of difficulty and some other mechanical things behind it as well, reward structure, that kind of stuff. So I did still want to make this video. So let's just take it one topic at a time, starting with the difficulty. In my opinion, this is pretty much a more punishing 24-man raid, and the reason for that is because there isn't really a DPS check. So in terms of DPS, it's really easy. There's only one DPS check in this entire raid, and that is on the chess pieces, like the very final phase. That is kind of like a mini DPS check. Outside of that, you can do fuck all, which makes it so that sometimes your runs last very long as well. I think I've had one run that went almost over an hour, so it can take quite a while depending on the party that you're running it with. But basically, you shouldn't be losing to these fights purely on a DPS perspective. When I say it is more punishing 24-man though, is because of how they handle failing mechanics. Usually whenever you fail a mechanic in more casual content, you get a vulnerability up marker. If you fail mechanics in Savage raids, for example, you get a damage down, and the damage down is of course much more severe because it makes the DPS check a whole lot harder, especially when you're clearing it when you're not super over geared, for example. When it comes down to vulnerability ups, I am always of the opinion that it doesn't really matter that much. Getting one vuln up, maybe two, isn't really going to affect your survivability all that much. Once you start getting like 3, 4, 5 vuln up markers, okay, that's where your survivability can be a little bit in jeopardy. But if a healer notices that you have a lot of vuln ups, they might be able to shield you when there is raid-wide damage coming out or something, and then it doesn't really impact you as a player in terms of your feeling of experiencing the fight. It's more kind of like giving the healers a bad time, because they have to keep you alive, basically. But outside of that, vuln-ups are kind of boring in my opinion, whereas with this new debuff, it's actually much cooler, because it's like, okay, you can get hit by a mechanic once and you'll still be fine, but if you get hit a second time, you're going to die. Of course, this needs to happen in a span of 2 minutes. So if you get hit once, the debuff drops after 2 minutes, you can get hit again and you'll be fine. But it is a little bit more punishing because of course there are going to be a decent amount of mechanics coming out in that 2-minute time span. But I do still think this is a really cool thing, because it also makes it so that if you do get hit, you don't get that vuln up where your healers need to worry more about you. That's still all going to be the same. It's purely on you whether or not you are going to drop to the floor or not if you get hit a second time. So I'm personally a big fan of this one. Of course, if you tend to get hit by mechanics quite a bit, you might not like it as much because you'll be dead on the floor a lot. But I do still think it's a pretty cool way of handling mechanics. And I do think that we're going to be seeing this more in the future as well, because in Savage, for E10 and E12, we actually have this debuff come back as well. So I do think it's a really cool way of doing things, because when I look at Savage, for example, it made it so that we couldn't heal LB3 through certain mechanics anymore, because you would just get Doom die and then the heal LB would be cancelled. So really cool thing, definitely a big fan. Secondly, the random party composition when you go into the Delubrum Reginae. This is something that I thought was a bit weird at first, because it's like, why wouldn't you want to have like a tank, a couple of healers, and then all of your DPS slots filled out? But I do actually think this is a really cool way, because it feels much more unique than a normal 24-man raid. Whenever I go in and it's like a normal 3 tanks, 6 healers, and then what is it, 15 DPS or something like that, it's very standard and that's all fine. But whenever you come into these situations where you are running with a non-standard composition, that's where things start to get a whole lot cooler. And for example, one of the runs that I did, we didn't have a single tank, so we had a monk take a defensive essence, also take some defensive actions, and then they were going to be our tank for our raid. And then of course we had to try and keep him alive with shields to get through the tank buster sometimes as well. But I thought it was a really cool thing to have a monk be the main tank of the raid. And on the other hand as well, whenever you're running and you don't have enough healers for all the parties, you can have, for example, a DPS take the healing essence and then also some healing lost actions to then basically be the healer of the party. I think those are really cool things. And they do add to a lot of uniqueness. For example, the gameplay that you're seeing in the background as well. I am playing White Mage, but I'm not going to be healing at all because I was using the DPS lost action, which boosts my DPS by 100%, but it comes at the caveat of me not really being able to heal. Of course, being a White Mage, I can press Benediction once every 3 minutes and that will still work, but all of my other heals are going to be very worthless, which is why you will also not really see me using my heals outside of Divine Benison, but that is just a shield that I can throw on the tank. That one does not really have to do with any healing output. So I do think those are really cool things. But this brings me to my third point, lost actions being kind of a necessity when you're going inside of the Delubrum Reginae. The content is made with lost actions in mind, and not necessarily actions, but mainly essences. Whenever you're running with a group that is all using their essences, you can clear this content in about 25 to 30 minutes. When you're running in a group that is not using these essences, it can take up to 50 minutes or an hour, depending on how good the players in the group itself are as well. So there's a very big discrepancy between these two different groups from the simple fact that people are using essences or they are not. And that makes it so that it can feel really bad when you are in a group where people aren't using essences. And I also can't really blame the players here because of how this content is set up. A lot of players don't like going into the Bozja Southern Front. Don't blame them for it. It isn't super rewarding either, so a lot of players go into Bozja, get to rank 10, clear Castrum, and then go into the Delubrum Reginae so that they can continue on with their relic questline, and that is totally fine. The problem is that Bozja, whenever you're leveling, is very unrewarding. Of course, I do know that once you reach max level, or like once you reach rank 10 and you don't care about leveling as much anymore, cluster farming, fragment farming, that can get very efficient, but as you are leveling, you mainly care about the skirmishes and the critical engagements, and from a reward perspective, where you don't care about experience, you care about something else than experience, those things aren't very rewarding in those cases. So that is where the problem kind of comes in. You're now being thrown into content that expects you to have these lost actions, these essences, and you don't have access to that many of them because whilst you were leveling inside of Bozja, you didn't really get all that many because it isn't that rewarding. So that's kind of where the problem lies. Even me, I went to rank 15, I did a second relic, purely doing Bozja Southern Front, where I did the critical engagements as well as Castrum to get the 15 items required, and even I ran out of essences when it came down to my tank, which is why I've been playing a lot of healer in like the last 10 runs or something that I have done of Reginae, because I just only had healer actions left. And then of course, well, I did still have some DPS actions as well, but I wanted to play healer because I could switch up being either a healer or a DPS, depending on the situation, if we had a lot of healers in the group, yes or no. So that's where my problem kind of lies with this. Also adding to that, the Delubrum Reginae itself doesn't really give you all that many rewards either. Yes, there are the random rewards at the end of the dungeon. Yes, if you're doing it for the relic, it's a pretty decent way to get your relic done. But outside of that, you just get those silver coins or whatever they are called, and you need a lot of silver coins to trade them in for 1 gold coin, which you can then use to get your gear, of course. But if you're really going after the gear, my best recommendation would be to just do the weekly quest and get it done that way. At least that's how I'm going to be doing it. So all of these silver coins that you're getting, there's not really all that much that you can do with them. So I would have really liked to see if you could use these silver coins to buy essences that you might need. So for example, you got to rank 10 in Bozja, you unlock the Delubrum Reginae, you have a few essences here or there from leveling inside of Bozja, and you can use those on, let's say, for example, your first run. Your first run of the Delubrum Reginae gets you some silver coins, and then now you can use those silver coins to buy the essences that you want. Again, I said it before, using lost actions in here is going to help you out quite a bit, but those aren't really the important things over here. You don't need them for the DPS, so I don't expect people to use them either, but having a damage boosting essence active, that is actually going to go a long way, because it will be active from the start of the Delubrum all the way to the end as well. So being able to trade silver coins for those actions or for those essences is something that I think would be a very great quality of life change, which would really add to the experience of this content as well. Because if this was the case, all of your runs would be around 30 to 35 minutes instead of 50 to 60 minutes, because people are just running out of essences. And if the only reason why you're inside of the Delubrum Reginae is just to get your relic weapon done, then you're most likely not going to go back into the Baja Southern Front purely to farm for those essences either. Of course, you can buy them from the market board, but again, not everyone wants to spend a few thousand gil on the market board to get those essences either. So I do think that putting something in place like that, where you can buy essences that you need, or even the fragments where those essences come from with the silver coins, that would be a really great addition to that. But outside of that, I'm a pretty big fan of the Delubrum Reginae. The difficulty is just normal 24-man, a little bit more punishing because of how the debuff interaction works with Doom. The random party composition makes for some really creative ways on how you can handle going through the content. As I mentioned, a monk main tanking the group, maybe having some DPS players play as your healers, or if you have too many healers, one or two of them could just turn into a DPS using one of those DPS essences as well. I think those are all really cool things. And then when it comes down to the lost actions, they're not really required. The essences, I do think that they're kind of a must-have if you want to have a smooth run. But again, it's really annoying to get those essences if you're not going to spend time inside of Baja, or if you're not just going to throw gil at the market board. But that is my take on the Delubrum Reginae. Let me know in the comments down below what your experience has been with the content. Have you been enjoying it? What are your thoughts on the content? Let me know down below. But on that note, I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank my Patreons for supporting me, and I'll see you in the next one.